Um, Good evening, everyone. So tonight this is our fifth session of Avelut. Wait 1 second. Let me see if I can record it. Okay. First, let me do a quick summary about Kriyah. That was the last discussion that we had was Kriyah. So I just wanted to sort of provide a very brief, practical guide of what do we do on those cases. So, in general, a very important rule when you get, if you have to officiate at a funeral, and God forbid if something that happens to us, is to always try to understand where the family comes from. Try to understand, talk to them, ask them about what are their practices. Do they have specific practices that you need to know, and try to work with them and not against them. Always try to understand also the special situation of where people are, and even if there's a minhag or something that you think is important, if you feel that they're not ready for that, it's not the right time. So always, this the precedence is for their mental and emotional well-being. So Kriyah, customary is to do Kriyah for parents on the left side because that's the place of the heart, and for the rest of the relatives on the right side. Some people do the tearing, the rendering of the clothes at the moment of death, of passing away. Some do it before the burial, some do it after the burial, some do it at home. So again, always be tuned to what people do. It's very common to see that women wouldn't do it in the cemetery; they would do it at home because of modesty. If people want to do a ribbon, you could try to explain to them why people tear their clothes. But if they want to do the ribbon, go with them. Also, one is allowed to change the shirt or the garment during the shiva, and you don't have to wear another one and tear it. But if people want to, because that's how they display to the community, they could do that. We also spoke about onen. We mentioned that the rule regarding onen in halakha, they speak about onen not being able or doesn't have to say the tefillot and the prayers and birkat hamazon, etc. But the agreement of most poskim, of most halachic authorities, that if one wants to do that and he is focused, he is allowed to do that. There's no reason for him not to do it. And sometimes, with the way we do it, people would feel more calm and more put together if they're allowed to do that than if we tell them you're forbidden. The only reason we tell them you're forbidden or you shouldn't do it is because we think they wouldn't have kavanah. But that in itself could help them be focused and calm down, which is extremely important. And add to that the fact that today, when we take care of the burial, it's not like in the past where it would be the immediate family who had to take care of every aspect of the funeral. We have the Heva Kadisha, we have other people who are involved in that. And speaking of Heva Kadisha, if any of you in your community, in your city, if you have the opportunity to somehow join the Heva Kadisha and help them with that, it's a very important mitzvah, and which is sometimes neglected. It's hard to find people who would do it. So now I want to go to the two topics of today that are related to the shulchan-aruch, and that we'll look at them. We'll look at them first in the shulchan-aruch, and then we'll go to the when we go to the other sources that I wanted to share with you. So let me share the screen here. And this text, if you want to see, you could see it in Sefaria. 1 second, it's not this one. Okay, so if you want to look it up, you could find it in Sefaria under my name, under Torah Ve'ava Smicha, or under my username. And I also sent you the link for this one. So here it is. So in Yoreh De'ah 344-2, the shulchan-aruch says, "Keshem shemaspidim al ha'anashim, kach maspidim al anashim karaui lahem." just as funerary lamentations are made for men, so too they are made for women, as it is fitting for them. So we're talking about eulogies and whatever people say or do, that they do it for women as they do it for men. And we will see also later on, we'll discuss the question of whether a woman could say a eulogy. So I don't know from your experience, what have you seen? But it depends. It differs from one community to another. In most communities today, from what I know across the range of the Orthodox community and beyond, the eulogies for women are conducted just in the same way as the eulogies for men. Especially in the Hasidic community, when the wife of a great leader or a great rabbi passes away, they do the same thing as they do in a for a man. I was actually at one time. In Yerushalayim when the wife of the Ger Rebbe passed away, and I attended the funeral. It was pretty powerful. I mean, you had tens of thousands of men. Of course, there were separations and like human barricades between men and women, but it was done. But the other side of the coin of women, can women say a eulogy? In most Orthodox communities, up to the modern Orthodox and open Orthodox, this is not done. In the Syrian community, even though it's generally modern Orthodox, a woman is not allowed to deliver a eulogy. And I've been in several such occasions where even the direct relatives of the deceased, daughters, spouses, mothers, sisters, were not allowed to speak at the hesped, and they would write a note that someone else would read. And for some reason, that has become the norm. They said this is immodest. A woman, at a eulogy becomes emotional. It's a compromising situation. It's immodest, whatever. So I want to go through the source and see where does this come from. I also know from someone who went through a tragedy, lost her brother, and that was in Israel, and the Hevra Kadisha there, which in many cases is run. It's not like the Hevra Kadisha in America that usually is run by volunteers. The Hevra Kadisha in Israel is run as a committee, sometimes even as a business, more clerical. And they didn't let her talk. She says she was eventually, when she insisted, they let her speak. She says after a whole bunch of people who knew nothing about her brother. So it was very, very distressful to her. So let us see where does this come from. So, like I said, shulchan-aruch says here in Siman 344 that lamentations or eulogies are made for women the same as are made for men. The commentators say that they bring that from a source in Megillah, which we'll see later. Rafram had a funerary lamentation made for his daughter-in-law in the synagogue, saying to pay honor to me and the dead, and all the people will come. So it's in honor of Rafram, was an important scholar. His daughter-in-law passed away. The eulogy, the procession was held in the synagogue. And also they had another example, which is word in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. On the day that the mother of Ben Zaza died, Rabban Gamliel made a great funeral lamentation for her, etc. Now, so they say, also one of the commentators, nowadays the law is that a coffin should not be taken into the synagogue, save in the case of a well-known rabbinic scholars. People fight over this as well, to say whether you're allowed to bring the coffin or the Gurney, which is in Israel, into the synagogue or not. But there should be no reason to do it for men and not for women. However, it's limited only to great scholars, obviously men in this case. So let's see, what do we have in terms of sources? We go, always when we analyze sources, we want to go in a chronological order. So one is a pasuk from Yirmiyahu that we've already reviewed before. This is in Jeremiah 9:16-17. He says, "Hitbonenu v'kiru lamekonenot utvoena ve'el hachamot shilchu v'tavona." Call the wailing women, let them come. Call the wise women, let them come over. Veis utmaherna v'tisena alenu nehi, and let them mourn for us, let them cry for us, and then what will happen? He says, "V'teradna einenu dim'a ve'afapenu yuzlumayim," and then we will cry and we will shed tears. So here he talks about a class of women who were professional wailers. They were the professional eulogizers that would be called to every funeral to rouse people to cry and to lament. But obviously, women were present at the funeral. There's another example in Masechet Yevamot in the Talmud Bavli, Yevamot 1:16-2. There was a certain situation, a certain legal discussion that necessitated people to think that the woman is out of her mind. So Rabbi Yehuda gave her an advice to pretend that she's mourning her husband, right? So he said, "Make a sifdi ba'alech kir'i manaich sitri mezyech." He says, undo your hair, tear your clothes, and say a eulogy for your husband. Similarly, we have in Talmud Yerushalmi, Masechet Moed Katan, Perek Aleph, says the Talmud there, the Talmud Yerushalmi speaks about the laws of Moed, of Chol HaMoed, and it says, "Lo te'orer isha levayata b'moed." A woman should not raise her voice in a way that causes people to cry during the Moed, during the holiday, meaning that any other day it is okay, only that during the Moed it is inappropriate because she will cause people to cry. So again, we see from here Talmudic source that a woman not only would be eulogized for, but she herself would conduct the eulogy or be present in the public eye and would mourn her dead, which makes sense. This is what has to be done. Why would we say otherwise? So now we'll look at the Taz on Even HaEzer, the Torei Zahav on Even HaEzer 17:3, and that discussion has to do with the question of agunot and when can we determine whether someone passed away or not. So we're talking about, which was very common in the past, in the different communities where people lived. Remember, people did not have IDs. Means of communication were very, very rudimentary, and took a long time to get from one place to another. And if someone went missing, there was no way to determine, in many cases, whether he's dead or alive. So now, how do you know that someone is dead? They say she's kiru ben ametim. When this person was mentioned in the prayers of the local community among the dead. So, for example, let's say someone traveled from Yerushalayim to Tel Aviv and disappeared. And then another guy from Yerushalayim who knew that person happens to be in Tel Aviv, and he hears in the synagogue that the name of that person is mentioned among the dead. So that tells him that this person passed away. So the Torei Zahav says, Nir'ah dehai mileta davkahi. Specifically that example of that person being mentioned by name in the Yortzeit list. Aval mashera'u et ishto maspedet al ba'ala. Mize en le'avi re'aya lehasi'ah. But if they saw that his wife is eulogizing her husband, and remember I said before, the word hesped not necessarily means eulogy. It could mean also a public display of sorrow, of beating your heart, tearing your clothes, slapping your face, different types of, but this is what we understand today. If that was allowed, definitely eulogy would be okay. So now, the Torei Zahav says this, if they have seen the wife of that missing person eulogizing him, mizeh en le'avi raya le'asiyah, this is not a sufficient evidence that she could get married, that he died, אלא אם היא ספדה על פי הוראות מורה, unless she conducted the eulogy according to the ruling of a rabbi, of a scholar, שיודע הדין שיש למחות בנשים שלא לספוד אדם, and that rabbi knows the law that a woman should be told not to conduct a eulogy. Therefore, we have to be concerned that maybe a woman went and conducted a eulogy without asking a rabbi, right? So if you read this source, and especially if someone reads just the second half of that source out of context, he would say, oh, a woman cannot conduct a eulogy, right? A woman cannot say a hesped unless a rabbi allows her to do so. But this is not at all the topic of the discussion. We are talking about someone who was missing. We're not talking about someone whose death was confirmed and everybody's there and the community knows, and then the woman, of course, the wife could go and have a eulogy. No, she shouldn't ask anyone. We're talking about someone who was missing, and his wife decides after a while to mourn him. And that's where we say we cannot rely on the fact that she mourned him, that she practiced the laws or practice of eulogy to think that he died. Right? It's a very specific case. However, and this is still about, like I said, women eulogizing. We're not even talking about eulogizing for women, which seems to be completely understood. And here we go to Maharshak, Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, who lived in Galicia at the turn of the 19th century. He's a very famous posek from Brody. And in his shoot called Ha'elef Lecha Shlomo Yoreh De'ah 304, he says this. הנה המחבר כתב, כשם שמספידים על האנשים, כך מספידים על הנשים. He quotes the shulchan-aruch that said that the same way you conduct eulogy for men, so you conduct eulogy for women. And says, הנה דין זה, אף שהוא מן הפוסקים הראשונים, צריך עיון. Says, this law, even though it is mentioned by the early poskim, by the early source of halacha, it needs to be studied thoroughly. Why? If you look at the commentaries of the Bet Yosef, you will see that the proof for that law is from those two cases that we mentioned before. Rafram, who said a eulogy for his daughter-in-law, and Rabbi Tarfon, that's a mistake, should be Rabban Gamliel, who said a eulogy for the mother of Ben Zaza. So the Rav Shlomo Kluger says, what is the source of the law of the halacha that you eulogize for women? Those two stories in the Talmud of great rabbis who made eulogies for women, either relatives of theirs or important women. But the Talmud in Moed Katan says differently, that when you carry the coffin or the gurney of a woman, you don't put it in the street, in the city street, because it is disrespectful. It is disrespectful. They don't say disrespectful to whom. Now, Rehovah Shel Ir, it's really, I translate street, but it really is Berahava Shel Ir, the plaza. That was the central plaza where everything was, every public event was held. So the Gemara says you don't put the gurney of a woman there. And the Talmud comments on that. They say that refers only to a woman who, God forbid, passed away at childbirth, because that is sort of her medical situation. Her physical state would be disrespectful for her to be in a gurney in the middle of the street. Remember, it's not a coffin; it's sort of an open gurney covered with the shrouds. Maybe there's blood from the birth. It would be disrespectful for her. So we don't do that. The rabbis of Nahar De'ah said that does not apply to other women. So we'll comment to this question that was raised. The story about the mother of Ben Zaza could be an Agadah. We don't know that it happened, but the story about Ephraim and his daughter-in-law is a real case. So we say Uvda Rabbah. So that when someone acts upon his ruling when he does a maaseh, that we rely on it. So in the Talmud, where they discuss putting the gurney in the plaza, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Af shel sh'ar nashim en ma'amidin. Rabbi Eliezer says no, even women who died natural death or not a compromising situation like childbirth, their gurney could not be positioned in the city street or in the city plaza. What is the proof? Dichtiv vatamot sham Miriam vatikaver sham samuch lemita kvura. This is the here you could say is divrei agada. There's no real proof in the pasuk. The pasuk says that they with the travels of Bnei Israel, they got to a certain point where Miriam died and was buried, and he says samuch lemita kvura, meaning that the burial was not delayed. And he says, the Rabbi Shlomo Kluger concludes, "Va'anan kai malan ki Rabbi Elazar sham," and we ruled like Rabbi Elazar. V'achi pasku akol b'siman shinun hey, and all the poskim, including the shulchan-aruch, ruled in that manner in chapter 355 of shulchan-aruch. V'im ken muchach de'en ma'amidim shum mita shel isha barechov. And now we have a clear proof that you cannot place the gurney of that woman in the city plaza. If we stop here and we just read again the question, we could answer very simply that there is no problem, there's no contradiction. Rabbi Shlomo Kluger tried to say that there is a contradiction between the two rulings, because one of them says, on one hand, the shulchan-aruch says that you make a eulogy for a woman, the other one says you don't put the gurney in the city plaza. But there's no contradiction. They talk about two completely different things. One is about eulogy, and one about the location and the placement of the coffin or the gurney, right? And he says, he knows that. So the next paragraph he says, we could have said that maybe it's only in the street that you could not do it, but you could do the hesped somewhere else. He says, no, but this is not a good answer. Why? Because Rabbi Elazar learned it from the pasuk of Miriam died and was buried, that the burial was immediately following the death. He concludes that for the pasuk, the verse that Rabbi Elazar quoted says that Miriam was not even eulogized. He says that it's a final proof. And so finally, what does he say? ולכך הפוסקים שפסקו לתרוויו צריך עיון טובה דהפסקים סתרי אהדדי. He says those two rulings in the shulchan-aruch which contradict each other are problematic. So it's just interesting in the mind of the posek. And you have to remember that Rav Shlomo Kluger was and lived at a time of the rise of emancipation, of enlightenment. Anything that looked a little different, a little liberal, should have been stopped. He was also a key player in the campaign against the machine-made matzah. Completely different issue, but very, very keen on keeping the tradition. So look at this. From a logical point of view, what he says does not make sense, with all due respect. Why? He says those two rulings in the shulchan-aruch contradict each other. We could have explained they don't contradict, because one speaks about eulogy in general, one speaks about a specific location for the gurney, but it's problematic. So therefore, instead of accepting that answer and saying they talk about two different things, he said, I don't know what the answer is, but ledina, as a halacha, nir'ah detov yoter liot hashomea yishma v'yahdal. It's better to teach people to not do it so they will stop, right? So, contrary to the shulchan-aruch, 200-300 years after the shulchan-aruch, we see that the poskim say that a woman should not be eulogized. And yes, thank you for the comment. Of course, Avraham nispod leSarah v'livkota. Avraham eulogizes Sarah. Maybe we'll say she was a great person, but who? We really have to look at it's an interesting study to look at how verses from the Tanakh are used in the study of halacha. It's sort of you use them when you want them. We could mold them to meet our needs. And here's Shul Divrei Malkiel. Malkil Kotler, in part 293, he says, he quotes the Gemara, same Gemara in Moed Katan 27, and the same shulchan-aruch in 355, that the gurney cannot be placed in the city plaza because of disrespect. And they also say that en olin behever ir ala isha, you can't accompany the funeral with the great leaders of the city. והשח כתב שאין כבוד לתלמיד חכם מנהיג העיר שילך ללוות אישה, and the Siftei Kohen, also commentary on the shulchan-aruch, writes that it's disrespectful for the scholar or the rabbi to be in the funeral for a woman. והנה בזמננו נהגו להספיד אישה ברחוב ואף יולדת וכן עושים שורה לאישה. He says, but we don't do it today. Today we do conduct a eulogy even in a public place, even for a woman who died during childbirth. The yudu shura, meaning that the mourners stand in two line, and the those who offer condolences pass between them. V'kashe ech osim neged dina mefurash bashas. Says, how can we go against what the Gemara says? And that's interesting. How really what happened there that it reversed. And I would say that even though we had those sort of like extreme opinions of Rabbi Shlomo Kluger about what you do for women or not, the community felt that this is inappropriate because it deals not only with the women who passed away but with their relatives. Right? This has to do with something else that I wrote about before, and that's the question of empathy. When something touches you, you care about that. So rabbis or scholars who were in a state of mourning for their wives, for their, like Rafram, for his daughter-in-law, for their relatives, felt that they had to do it. So whether there were voices against it or not, they didn't care. Eventually they did it, and it became again the norm. However, when it comes to the question of whether a woman can address the community, when a woman can talk, it was easier for the same man to say, I know that you feel sorry, but it's okay, I'm going to speak for you. What do we care, as long as a eulogy is being said for the deceased? But it's not the same. However, Rabbi Kotler says, Pashut shem b'zeh isur Torah, there's no prohibition to eulogize a woman. Wow, it's amazing that we have to say that em b'zeh isur Torah. And then he bring another source from Moed Katan. Hamadhem mitat aviv v'imo harei ze meguneh. If someone rushes to bury his father and mother, it is disrespectful. Harei mefurash shemitzvah leashhot mitat imo lichvoda. Here we have a clear case where we learn that one should delay the burial of his mother in order to eulogize her. ועל כוח כך צריך לומר, דבבית או בחצר שרי להשהות, וקרא דמרים עבירה כאסמכתא. So he is forced to reinterpret the discussion before, and to say, first, the logical answer to Rabbi Kluger's question, and to say, there's a difference between the city plaza and a more private or intimate place. But second is this, Kra de Miriam havera kasmachta. The whole story with Miriam, that samuch lamita kvura, that she was buried immediately following her death. This is just an asmachta. It's not a real proof from the pasuk. It's just something to embellish the halacha that was already established. Umimele ledidan shamed mushkav al mita shenesarem, and he says, and the next step that he takes is, back then it was a gurney, but we have a coffin, so even in the street, there's no problem of disrespect. Now, from here, like, we go back like a full circle to the to a proof which is based on a real life case. That is brought by Rabbi Yitzhak Zilberman, who was a rabbi in Bnei Brak, and is in his halacha, he is what you would call Haredi, ultra orthodox. In his commentary on the Gemara called Hishukei Hemed, he tells of a story of a what he called a tragic story that happened in the cemetery in Herzliya. A woman who was a a new immigrant from Russia, an observant woman, as the Hevra Kadisha to help her with the funeral. She said they had no relatives in Israel, so people came to do the minyan. And here he says this, Haisha Otzeret, it's on Shavuot 18:2 in Hishuk HaHemet. He says this, Haisha Otzeret HaHevra Kadisha, Vishoel Ma'im Esped Alamet. So just before the burial, the woman stopped the people of Hevra Kadisha, and she said, what about a eulogy? And they said, En kan echad shu makir et haniftar, we don't know him. Haisha omeret, im ken ani aspidenu. And the woman said, let me eulogize him. And she said, she speaks to her husband, she says, Sasha, only you and God and me, only us know the truth why we have no children who can now accompany you in your last journey, because in our city there was no mikveh. And when they heard that, they all cried and they all recited the Kaddish. So he brings the tragic story in the context of mikveh, which I'll have to say something about it in a second. But with, as we said, derech agav, by the way, we learn that women eulogize men. This is a Haredi rabbi from Israel, Rabbi Zilberman, who speaks of a story of a woman who says an hesped. He never says, "Oh, can you imagine that a woman said hesped and nobody told her to stop." For him, it's a natural thing. It's interesting. The real tragic part of that story is that since they came from Russia, if they would have ever known the ruling of the Ben Ish Chai, who says that you can make a mikveh anywhere from ice. You take ice or snow and you put it in a bathtub and you let it melt. It is not considered drawn water because you put snow or ice in the bathtub, and it became water by itself. It's a natural process. So it would be the easiest thing for them to create a mikveh for themselves. That teaches us how important it is to disseminate a halakha. If we know a halakha, if you know a halakha that can help people, we should teach it to people. It reminds me also of another similar case. Thank God in that case they had children, but if you ever read the book The Bamboo Cradle, about two professors from America who adopted a Chinese girl and then had their own children because they decided to keep the laws of mikveh, and when they were still just in the beginning of their way, they lived in Alaska, and the woman would fly on a military plane 12 hours to the States and back to go to the mikveh. I remember reading this story and saying, God, help her. You know, she would have known about it. She's in Alaska. There's all the ice that you need in the world to have a mikveh. Anyway, now let's look at this. Finally, this source, more modern and contemporary, just like Rabbi Zilberman, Tzemach Yehuda by Rabbi Yehuda Zrahia Segal. So in part 473, he brings again this problem. Yesh ke'ilu stira ben hapsakim. He says it seems ostensibly that there is a contradiction between the two rules. One which says you don't put the gurney in the street because it causes like public display of sorrow, and you need to bury her as fast as possible. And the other one is that you have to eulogize for men as for women. It says, so the real question is, how do you rule in two different ways? And he says, it's not difficult at all. Why? כי אפשר דמצווה להספיד, ולא לפני הקבורה, אלא לאחר הקבורה. או בטרם מוצאת המיטה, והקהל הרי מוזמן לשעה מסוימת, ואפשר להקדים מעט ולהספיד כמה שירצה. He says, of course, there's a mitzvah to say eulogy. That's the last chesed that we do with the person that passed away. So when we do that, we actually please the person, the neshama of the person who passed away, and all family members. So if we could do it either before or after the burial. We have a set time. We have a chapel. We have a designated place where we can do it. It's not a problem. And he adds to that this. One cannot say a shorter eulogy or less eulogies for a woman because it's for her soul, and it's a mitzvah gdula. But he says the the problem maybe is when people would just put the gurney and would cry and would wail but would say nothing, and that is the important thing. And it concludes the most important thing is that there will be no disrespect for the person who passed away. So, coming back to a practical question. So what do we do today? There's no question that whether a man or a woman should be eulogized in a way that is appropriate for them. When it comes to the question of bringing a coffin to the synagogue, if there is a reason to give special respect to that person, whether a man or a woman, the gurney should be brought to the synagogue. What do you do with the kohanim there? It's another question that we'll have to discuss. But there is no problem in doing that. We cannot argue that the synagogue as a holy place is because of its purity. You cannot bring the coffin there because the practice has already been established, and because we are all tmemet anyway. This impurity of dead people we already have. Anyway, it's very rare. We have people usually go to chapels, they go to funeral homes. But if that rare case happens, if there is a situation where a coffin should be brought to the synagogue, there should be no difference whether it's a man or a woman and the type of eulogies. How about women addressing the community? There's no question that women should address the community and their relatives or whoever is there in speaking and conducting the eulogy just as men did, because there's no difference in their sorrow. I'm saying to each his own. One could argue that even women are more sensitive and they feel more left out when they're not allowed to talk. But even without getting there, because we don't want to get into sort of stereotypes, but just from the point of view of equality, just as men are allowed to display their sorrow and to address the community, so should women. Okay, so with that we conclude that subject, and the next one will be mourning for one who committed suicide. But before we continue, I want to see if anyone has any questions. So let's go to the next topic, which is very we continue to the laws of Me'abed Atzmo Lada'at. So this is in Yored De'ah 345.1. The shulchan-aruch says, Dina Me'abed Atzmo Lada'at u'menudeh v'harogeh bedin. Me'abed Atzmo Lada'at, one who commits suicide willfully, En mit'askin imo lechol davar, is not attended at all. We don't take care of any of the needs of the funeral. Ve'en mit'abelin alav, and one does not mourn for him. Ve'en maspidim oto, and no lamentation or no eulogies are made for him. Ve'lo kora'im, and one does not rend garments for him. Ve'lo choltzim, and one does not bear the shoulder. Remember that we said that they used to bear shoulders in mourning. Aval omdin alav b'shura, but they stand in the line of comforters where people go through that. V'omrim alav birkat avelim, v'chol davar shu kavod l'chaim, and they say the bracha of the mourners and everything that shows a sort of respect for those who are alive, for the living. So that seems to be for people the clear halacha. Almost everyone who says will know, in quotation marks, he knows clearly that you don't sit shiva and you don't do mourning for someone who committed suicide. In 345.2, the shulchan-aruch continues, Ezeu me'abed atzmo lada'at, what is considered a willful suicide? Kegon shamar harei hu ole lerosh hagag. If someone said, I am going up to the rooftop, ve'ra'u she'ala miyad derech ka'as, or shaya metzer ve'nafal umet, so he went up and he was very angry and upset, or he was in distress and then he fell and died. Harei ze b'chizkat she'ibed atzmo lada'at. So we assume that he committed suicide. But if we see someone who was strangled or hung or someone who fell on his own sword, we don't assume that he killed himself, but rather someone else killed him, and everything else is done for him regularly. If we continue here with the Shalot Shuvot of Rabbi Haim David Halevi. This is part 1, chapter 47. Here's the question. It says, people used to ask Rabbi Haim David Halevi, people from all walks of life. He was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. So people not necessarily observant would ask him questions, especially when it comes to the question of death, mourning, funerals, etc. So they said, one of the family members committed suicide, and the rabbi of the neighborhood ruled for us not to do kri'ah, not to sit shiva, and the rabbi himself would not conduct a eulogy. It says this attitude caused us great sorrow that was unnecessary considering the tragedy. I mean, you already experienced the tragedy. We didn't have to do that. And the person who asked the question wanted to know why did the rabbi did what he did, and whether there is something that could obligate someone to stay alive. So the answer that Rabbi Haim David Halevi gives, he says, "Ken ha'chaim nitnu la'adam al yedei haboreh ve'en lo shum reshut la'abedam." The life was given to us by God, and we have no right to destroy them. So we understand that in a way as murder, that the closest the person who's murdered is to the murderer, the greater the sin is. Even though one could say the same thing, it's taking a life, but it's more shocking if one kills his relatives. It's more shocking than killing a distant person that he doesn't know. So killing oneself, that is the person who's closest to us, that's why it is such a shocking thing. So he says, life is not ours, and we cannot take it away. And he brings the rabbinic interpretation that on the pasuk, I will demand your blood. I will take revenge for your life. The rabbis interpreted that this is referring to one who commits suicide, which is interesting because it's a pasuk that appears in Parashat Noach. It's not part of the codex that was given to Am Yisrael. It says it's obvious that one is considered a murderer, and even worse because Rabbi Haim David Halevi says one might say that this is worse because a murderer can make teshuvah. He could have some kind of repentance, but one who killed himself has no means to do teshuvah anymore. Then in parentheses he adds that sitting shiva is a debate, and therefore if the family wants to sit shiva and to have the practices of mourning, they're allowed to do that. There's no prohibition against it, even though the rabbi told them not to do that. In here, it's like really in a sort of a side comment, he adds that not always we can know clearly that the person who committed suicide, we don't know that he did not do teshuvah, that he did not regret. Maybe he did it a second before he died, and therefore one should not be too strict regarding those rules. And whatever has to do with things that we do for the merit of the soul, like learning Torah and saying Kaddish, not only you should say it, but you should say it even more. So now, interestingly, if we go backwards, we go back in time to Rav Pe'alim, Rabbi Ish Hai, in the 19th century in Baghdad. He has this question that about a woman who swallowed poison and died after a short while. And she wrote a letter to her father asking him to say Kaddish for her, and also to give charity for her, on her name. And that woman used to say that a couple of years earlier she had a dream that she only have 2 years to live, and the time that was given to her in the dream was exactly the day in which she swallowed the poison. And she told the family members the dream at the time, and they told her, "No, don't worry, this is just a dream. It means nothing." But she kept obsessing with this dream. She always thought about that, And so the Ben Ish Chai, we see that he already looks at this question as a person who was obsessed with that and maybe was mentally unstable. And as we know today, that really to be at that point of taking one's life, one either suffers from a certain mental condition that pushes him there, like suicidal tendencies, or is in such great distress, or a person has been bullied, people have been harassed, violated physically, or many other different things. It's really an extreme situation for people to commit suicide. And there is also another category of where it is done as a social phenomenon. This is also documented that when one person does it, other people follow. It becomes like a very, very strange, scary fad, but it's known, and that's maybe why the rabbis went strongly against it. However, we go back to the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai says that when she told the dream to people, they told her not to worry, but she was obsessed with it. So now that she passed away, they wanted to know what should they do? Should they mourn for her? Should they say Kaddish? And they also wanted to know, where is it written? What we will say, people say that someone who takes his own life, someone who commits suicide, will not have a share in the world to come, and so the Ben Ish Chai was asked also not only what can we do for the neshama, should we say Kaddish, should we sit Shiva, but also they wanted to know what is the source of what people say that he who commits suicide has no share in the world to come. And he answers, Davar ze lo nimtza b'divrei Razal. It is not in our sources, it is nowhere to be found. And he quotes also the author of Teshuvah Me'ahava on that. And he says it makes sense that all the rabbi said is don't deal with that person, don't do the regular practice of the funeral, but why wouldn't you say Kaddish? Why wouldn't you say anything for his kapara? That is of course necessary. And he quotes also Maharhaf Rabbi Haim Palachi. He says, "En mit'ablim alav shamanu, aval en mitpalim alav lo shamanu." When we heard people say that you don't mourn for that person, but we've never heard that you don't pray or say or learn for him, etc. He says, therefore, you should say Kaddish, Ashkava, the memorial services, mitzvot for her, etc., etc. Then he concludes, and we'll go next time, because the screen falls, we missed a little bit, but next time we'll go to the amazing Teshuvah by Rabbi Israel Moshe Hazan and Ikrach Shel Romi. But here he says this, but here we have a special factor, and that is, she wrote a letter asking her father to say Kaddish for her, and she also said, please spend money, give money to charity for me. So he says, נראה ברור דאין לבת ההיא דין מאבד עצמו לדעת כלל. She is not considered someone who commits suicide. So the Ben Ish Chai goes against the clear evidence of a woman who said, I'm going to die on that day, and she took poison and she killed herself, and against the halakha that says that one who commits suicide should not be taken care of. He looks at the whole thing and he says, no, that person was under tremendous stress. She believed that this is going to happen to her. It is not a normal situation, and therefore I don't judge her as someone who commits suicide, and I want the family to behave as a normal, as anyone who passed away. So yes, this is basically like the question that's being raised here by Yeshua. What about suicide due to mental illness? I mentioned before that now we know better. Now we know that this usually does not happen without some kind of a mental condition in most cases, and we don't hold it against the person. And that is what we'll see, God willing, in next week's class, which will be on Hanukkah. But if you want to go ahead and review the text, you can look at Rabbi Israel Moshe Hazan, Krach Shel Romi, chapter 14. It's on page. I have two quotations. One from page Mem Adaf Mem Aleph, the other one from Daf Nun Gimel. It's a very long teshuvah. His teshuvot are usually very, very long, but extremely sensitive and analytical. And he says, I'll just read this line today. It says, why are we so anxious about this specific transgression to consider someone who did it unwillingly as if someone who did it deliberately to go against God? Says, think logically, why did that person commit suicide? What happened to him? We must say that the world for him turned to total darkness, and his distress and his troubles caused him to choose death over life. How can we judge that person and call him someone who deviates from the paths of the public? So extreme sensitivity is really an important personality to know. Rabbi Israel Moshe Hazan, his teshuvot are very long, but I hope that we'll run into him again, and definitely we'll analyze his teshuvah next week, B'ezrat Hashem.